Last year, I was making a bunch of videos about adrenal fatigue. And I don't think anybody knew what I was talking about, but that's okay. So Google it. And MDs feel like it's a fringe concept. There's Addison's disease, which one of our presidents had, and that's considered like real adrenal dysfunction. But other than that, it's not taken very seriously in the traditional medical community. In the functional health community and the naturopathic space, it is a real deal problem. And what it's a physical manifestation of the stress response. Somebody dies, you get a divorce, you lose a job, you go bankrupt, you know, you just hate life in general because things are kind of miserable for a few years. There's a physiological consequence of that occurring. The adrenals are located in the lower back, and they're tiny little things, and they communicate with your brain in response to stressors in your environment and create the fight or flight response. So that's where that comes from. People lifting cars off of somebody trapped underneath, that's because of that adrenaline rush. Okay, so adrenal fatigue means that you went through something stressful and you did it for so long that your body is no longer, for whatever reason, to properly create the energy that you need in cortisol. So you find yourself drinking a lot of coffee, you're popping pills, you're eating sugary foods, you're doing things to keep yourself propped up. You might find that you're in response to not having enough cortisol over time, because initially you start like this, and eventually you come down, okay? On the way down, you'll start to notice that you can't lose weight, you're cold all the time, and that ties into thyroid hormones. We'll talk about that in the next video. You're cold all the time, you're dizzy when you stand up, you go from, squatting or seated to standing, and you get dizziness. Hypotensive, very low blood pressure, thinking of other things, constipation. So you notice that you have this host of challenges that are occurring. At the same time, now, one other thing that can occur, and I'll talk about this later, is your hormones in other areas, your sex hormones, your thyroid hormones, as well as your gut functioning starts to get impaired because the body is so depleted of cortisol and can't create it on its own. It's starting to disrupt other hormone pathways. Cortisol is created with fat in the diet, okay? So that's why fat is so important in the diet. There's an HPA axis, look that up, and the way that axis is fed is with fat. That comes down and it trickles into something that's called pregnenolone. Pregnenolone is a mother hormone, and it trickles down into sex hormones. Progesterone goes this way and comes down over cortisol. When cortisol is insufficient, you get into what's called pregnenolone steal, and you're starting to steal from pregnenolone, which is supposed to be feeding other places and only feeding into your cortisol pathway, okay? That becomes a problem because that can only go on for so long without problems with PCOS and problems with fibroids, and then people are telling you need to have an ablation to your cervix or uterus, or, it starts to create issues. So one big issue is the fact that something happened that wore you out. Now, adrenal fatigue can also be underlying causes, and I'm going to get to these quickly. Blood sugar, gut infections, over-exercise, under-eating, taking too many drugs, liver problems. So there could be something going on that also stresses out your adrenals. And so as long as that little pathway where cortisol is stealing from pregnenolone is occurring, pregnenolone still is happening, it's going to be very difficult to actually get good traction with weight loss. And what you'll find is if you stop doing any of the things you've done, if you stop running all the time, or if you stop cutting out all the calories or restricting fat or restricting carbohydrates, your weight rebounds very quickly. So what has to happen with clients when I work with them is I do a lot of this these days. And I was a stage 3 adrenal fatigue. I said this in 50 million videos. But I explain my grumpiness, my bad mood all around sometimes, as well as all the other things that were going on with me. And it required that my HPA axis be repaired. You can stop doing the craziness that got you into trouble in the first place, but it doesn't fix the HPA axis. That's when you end up going to the doctor and asking for drugs and hormones and things like that to intervene on kind of what's happened with your hormone pathway. So something to keep in mind, I do a lot of testing lab work around this, but just adrenal fatigue, pregnenolone steal, those are your keywords. I'm going to go ahead and stop this video. I'm going to pick up on some of the other hormone talk and explain kind of over-exercise and how it affects hormones next. But that's how stress and hormones are playing into a blocking factor for weight loss. Moving on.